Hello, I'm Mark Tucker,
And I'm Alan Furstenberg, and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Hey, welcome back, Alan.
Good to be back, Mark, as always. And always good to see you and chat with you.
Yeah, thanks. Things are going here in sunny today, Arizona, though we've had some rain this last week, which has been good.
So we record this a little bit early, and right now we're going through a huge heat wave here. So it is a tad on the warm side.
Yeah, so I don't know how temperatures compare there to here, but you have a lot more humidity than we have to worry about. So
yes. So normally, I think the temperatures we're hitting are normal for an Arizona summer, but a little bit on the high side here. But yeah, definitely high humidity.
And not everybody has air conditioning, right?
No.
Which I can't believe. That doesn't.
I know. I lived in Houston for a few years, and the notion of people not having air conditioning is strange. More people in the New York area have air conditioning than, say, in northern Massachusetts and Maine or Seattle. But yeah, there's still a decent chunk of people that don't have it or don't need it. If they're on the coast, you get a nice sea breeze most of the time.
Yeah, normally you're good except for these weird times.
Yeah,
like you're having now.
But it's funny that we actually start talking about the weather, because in thinking about what to talk with for today, I was talking with Dennis, who is another GDE, is at all of my office hours, has been a fantastic person in the voice space. And he had just talked about an action that he wrote and got published within one day.
Oh.
That was just querying an API, getting a value, and returning it. And you and I are talking now about the weather, and there are a ton of weather APIs. And at Voice Lunch US a couple of weeks back, we were kind of brainstorming stuff. And one of the things we were brainstorming was, well, what other weather stuff would we want to query, and what's available out there via API? So I was thinking all of that would make sense to kind of chat about, well, how do we deal with APIs when it comes to voice development? And some of it seems kind of obvious, and some of it's not much different than others. But I think there are a couple of unique things about how we deal with it, given some of the constraints that we've got to work with.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking about that in a lot of ways. I'll program in Node.js, and calling an API from a Node app is just pretty standard stuff. There's a lot, but you've got some different things that are unique. Part of it is we talked about recently about lists. What happens when your API returns back a list, and we went over all of that in that episode. So check it out if you haven't yet. But there's also like a timeout limit. So you need to make sometimes you make an API call and it fails, and you do some sort of like call multiple times and degrade gracefully, or there's lots of different strategies that you can do, but that 5 or 7 seconds isn't really all that much time, and you really want to still get it done less than 2 seconds, less than 1 second for an API call if you can, because it seems like an eternity having to wait for the response to come back, and it kind of just jags up the conversation if it's going too slow.
Yep. So let's talk about that first. How do we deal with APIs when we either think they might or know they will take more than 5 seconds? What can we do? Or is there anything that you can do? I know one great tip. One great tip that I heard once, for example, was one notorious API that takes a long time are anything that involves travel. If you want to look for an airline reservation and you're trying to book a hotel, those seem to take forever. So what one person suggested, and this was a designer, suggested, make the call, have it immediately start executing kind of as a background process, and immediately return a message saying, okay, I'm going to work on that. In the meantime, you say you're flying to Florida. What are you looking to do when you're there? So start engaging with, if you can think about what a human would do, when they're waiting for the computer to do something. Nowadays they would say something like, hang on, I'm waiting for the computer. But they might, a travel agent might try to engage in conversation.
Yeah, multitask, try to get things done, because the faster that you can get people through, the happier they're going to be, and the more opportunity you have to help additional people, which would be better for them, be better for you overall.
Right. But also, if you think about it, this small talk is just kind of friendly. It's meant to be engaging and get the person thinking about and excited about what their travel is for. Or you might ask, is this for business or for pleasure? And store that information away so that later on in the conversation, maybe you'll bring it up again and say, I see you're going to Orlando during these dates. Are you planning on going to this event? So raising some of that stuff and possibly using it as an upsell later is certainly one interesting approach. Doesn't work for everything, of course.
Yep.
But I think it's an interesting approach that your designer may come up with. The catch is, though, you now have a background process that's running that will come up with an answer, and it can't just send back the reply. It's got to wait for you to make another request to the server. So in cases like that, you need to store the answer against the session, and then the next time your webhook gets called in that session, you need to check to see if there's any information that you've gathered in the meantime.
Right. So yes, there's definitely, you can do that. There's also, like, if it's going to be a longer running process, there are things, notifications on the Alexa side of things, where you can say, I've started the process. It's going to take a few minutes. I'll notify you when it's done. And so they could continue on doing things in the skill, or they could end, at which point, your back-end process is doing stuff, and you could keep track of, this is the user ID, the Alexa user ID for the person. And when your back-end process finishes, you can call an API passing that same user ID, which then triggers a notification, which then goes to the person's machine or phone and says, hey, you've got 2 new notifications, and then, or whatever it is, and you can then ask, and it'll say XYZ travel app has a notification. You have 1 new message from XYZ travel app. Would you like to, listen to it or something? So then that kind of can kick off the process too. So there are some things that you can do to handle things asynchronously.
No, it's a great point. Being able to take advantage of notifications where it's appropriate.
Yep.
And certainly for very long running stuff, it makes sense. For stuff that, will run for 30 seconds, that seems like, that's longer than the 2 seconds, but it's, you're not going to end things and then 30 seconds later get the notification that you can continue the conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. So the best thing that you can do for your user, if you can do it, is keep them in one session,
right,
and handle it all.
I think my point is more that, you need make sure you use the right trick for the right purpose. And one of the other tricks on the Google side that we have sometimes is being able to take advantage of the media player. So one thing that I will do sometimes is say, this is going to take a while, and start playing hold music. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things about the way the hold music, the media player works, is that when it ends, it will automatically trigger another callback to your action, as if the user had said something. So it triggers a special intent. And in that intent handler, you can then check to see if you got a result back. If you did, go ahead and continue the conversation. If not, say, nope, still working on it, and kick off the hold music again. So, I'm not sure how user-friendly that is, but certainly if you're expecting results back in kind of that intermediate time period, 30 seconds, I can listen to hold music for 30 seconds. 30 minutes, there I want a notification.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, just kind of go through your checklist and say, is this, how much time is this going to take? Is it something where I can possibly keep it into one session? If not, then what are my alternatives, and go down that path.
And I think the good part is that the back end stuff is essentially all the same. We need to kick off a back end process somehow.
Yeah.
And whether that is your Lambda process continues to run, or it triggers off another Lambda process, or the equivalent, or whatever.
Something like some pub sub thing,
right,
Eventbridge,
exactly.
So there's lots of different options that you have for that.
But as always, make sure you scale them to how long you think the operation itself is going to take.
Yeah. So something I hear at times when people are talking about like, oh, I'll just do progressive response on Alexa. But really, progressive response is like one of those tricks where you show a cursor on your screen, doing something so that the user realizes that you're doing something. It doesn't necessarily speed things up. It just kind of gives some response back. You could say, like, in a progressive response, sending this off now, or executing your search, please wait, type of thing. But you still have that same 7-second response, and you have to come back. You don't buy any additional time by doing progressive response. You just get some text back to the user quicker while things are happening.
This used to be what we used to call trivial response time. You want the trivial response time to be very good, even though it's not going to be saying anything.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. That's useful, but as you said, you still have the 7-second limit that you need to be aware of.
Yeah.
One of the I think one of the things about APIs that can sometimes be a little bit difficult to deal with, even on visual sides, is that you don't always, you don't always get a nice clean response back.
Yes.
Or, you certainly need to make sure that you massage in some way whatever format the data that comes back in. And I can imagine that's got to be worse when dealing with audio, because we have no idea in some cases what in the world is going to be coming back or how to pronounce it. And so normally, when we control very rigidly what our response can be, we might tweak, so that it sounds like this, even though it shows this on the display, or, so we've got some of those tweaks. It's really hard to do when you don't control what's coming back.
Yeah. So like if you're listing like a list of contacts or things like that, you've got, people's names is the data that you're sending back in your text to speech. And there was something that was announced more recently from this last Alexa Live, where you can, it sounded like you could specify kind of a dictionary of terms or how to pronounce things. So, but even if you do that, then people's names, same spelling could be pronounced different ways, So it is challenging. And, I think eventually, as voice becomes more and more of a thing, there will be ways where we have part of our profile, our name, how it's spelled, how we'd like it pronounced, and that type of information going into systems. So like, me being a user in a system that's going to then use that data as the source, could then return back that same information. As I think the data that's being stored in systems become more voice friendly, then I think that will be a huge benefit, because then you'll get to hear people's names pronounced the way that they are, because that's always something that's a good reminder of like, I'm going to go visit such and such person. How do you say their name again, or what's?
Sure, having people specify how to say their own name will hopefully become commonplace.
Yeah.
Or even in some cases, I can easily imagine for a corporate directory, hear the person in their own voice say what their name is.
Yep.
You just need to somehow get that back in, get that into the API and get that flowing downstream so that other people can use it. So maybe that's a thought when designing APIs, we need to be thinking about that more as well.
Yeah, so not only does the API need to return back the data that you would show on a display, but you need to start returning back data that would be pronounced by a voice system.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the other challenge that I see a lot with APIs, and this is a challenge again in the regular server space, but I think it's compounded here, is the whole authentication and authorization quagmire.
Yeah, that is a big challenge.
Yeah, on good days, we we can log people in and maybe get their permission to access something on an API. But doing that in voice, even with account linking, is just frustratingly difficult.
Yeah, there's definitely a subset of people that will start an application and then make it past the account link, and they'll hit the part and say, well, this is just too big of an issue or a hassle to do.
Yeah, I think hopefully, I think we're getting better at it. We saw some stuff with Alexa Live. We see some stuff with Google Sign In. And I think it's okay in some cases when it comes to permissions, when we have to deal with OAuth permissions, I think it's okay to skip to the phone for a little bit. As long as we only do it maybe once or twice. It's not, you can't do it every time. Asking for permissions every time just isn't going to work. Yeah,
that is definitely challenging. You want to protect your data and voice stuff. So I think there's are going to be new things implemented that will help this voice login stuff in the future. But
yeah, I think what we have with account linking now is a good first step. We're at a good stage at this point. We're using voice recognition to do account linking. I think that's all reasonable. But we're going to need to get better. But it also does kind of suggest we still need to deal with, where do we store the keys? How do we store the keys? How do we do that safely?
Not in your code. And not in your code. To GitHub. Yes.
Yeah. Not in your code. Not in a file. Store them in secure configuration, and every service has a secure configuration system at this point.
Yep.
So, or use environment variables.
Yeah, and that's what I do quite a bit. Is like locally, I have I use even though I'm developing on Windows, I'm using a Bash shell, and there is something called direnv during env, and there's a envrc or something like that file.
.env usually, I think.
Yeah, that you can specify. So I make sure that that's in my git ignore. So I'd never check that into my repo, but I can go ahead and put export different environment variables in that file, and then I can set up my shell that it will read based on what directory I'm in. So like when I'm in my directory running code locally, then it's going to go ahead and run that file and load those environment variables in, and then you can use a local. And then when I go ahead and deploy things, I deploy them, and then I go ahead and make sure that I configure the environment variable stuff separately.
Mm-hmm. I do very similar. Some of what I do though is store it in a secure configuration environment. This way I can, depend, for each project has its own configuration, and this way I just treat it as configuration, just like I treat other configuration. If you haven't figured it out from 57 episodes, I like storing stuff in configuration.
Well, and there's lots of different options that you can choose. You can, like you say, you can do environment variables. You can write on the Lambda. Mm-hmm. If you're doing AWS, you can.
Google's got similar on there.
Crypto, there's secrets manager. There's all kinds of things there. If you're like working in a bigger environment, you can use things like Console and Vault.
Just don't put it in code.
Yeah, just don't put it in code.
Never put it in code.
Yep.
And again, none of that's different than what normal server-side development is, but a lot of voice developers may not have thought about that.
Yeah.
And it's always a good reminder, even for those of us that have thought about it.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes we forget or get lax and like, oh, I'll just do this. And then, it turns out that you're like, oh, wait, I need to make sure I take this out before I check it in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, stuff like that could happen. One of the things I do in my code is I separate, like I have something called a class file or a module for services, one for each API that I do, and I wrap the get or the post request inside of a function call and pass things in, and like my base URL is usually an environment variable, and then I build the rest of the URL up, and you can use things like Axios or other things to access the API, and I make sure that I set the timeout limit on Axios because the default isn't 5 seconds. It's assuming that you're in some other environment where you don't have to worry about time as much. So make sure that gets all set up, and so
that's a
ahead.
really good and really important point. I think is that a lot of APIs do have libraries that come with them.
Yep.
But it's important in those cases to make sure that the timeout for your call is less than what that's a really excellent point, actually.
Yeah.
But it leads to the next question of, well, how do you handle if it fails within?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting to. So because things are in a separate class, kind of all hidden behind this, get items API call, right? Passing in the key or other things, query parameters, whatever I need to pass into that function. It's kind of all hidden behind there. Then I just do a whole try catch around that. And then what I typically do, like if it's something that's going to return back multiple result sets, I set an empty array at the beginning. So if I fail and I hit the catch block, then in the end, I'm still going to return back an array, even though if it's an empty array. That way I always know it's an array. I can always check to see if the length is greater than 0. But I typically, in my response coming back, actually, I return back an object. And people do it, you can do it all kinds of different ways, but I return back an object that has a success, true, false, and then a data, which is then, whatever else I'm getting back. And so since everything's wrapped in that try catch, then I don't have to worry about it behind that function. I just call the function, await on it, get the response back. Then I can check to see if the status is success or not. If it is success, I go ahead and then I can check to see if there's 0 response. I can handle it differently if there's 0, 1, or more responses, like we talked about and our list stuff. But if it comes back as false for a status, then I can say, I'm sorry, we're having problems, try again later. And then you can also do things like keep track of how many times that's happened in a session. And if it's, because maybe sometimes it's just an API call that's kind of went flaky and they say, hey, try it again later, and then give them the option to do it again. But if it happens a couple of times in the same session, then you're like, something bigger is happening. And this is just going to get more annoying for the user to try to keep trying again, to be told that they can't do it again. But that's kind of how I do it. Do you have a different approach or?
I do some things very similar, so I do have almost everything has its own wrapper function or wrapper method that I have for it. So everything I try to contain that way. Since I use multivocal and multivocal has this big environment object, I tend to pass that environment object around a lot. And this is a great place where I do so. So, I pass the environment object in, and I expect it to come back with an answer, with the environment populated with additional information. And at some point, I go and evaluate all of my information to come up with the result. And if for whatever reason I didn't get back the answers I thought at some stage in the API, I can say something went wrong somewhere.
Yeah.
But other than that, very similar. And mostly, I think partly I do that is because I want to make it, every time I make a call to make a call into pull something out of a database, store something to a database, make an API call somewhere else, there's a lot of additional stuff that I need to make sure is correct. I need to give it right paths. I need to give it authentication. I need to, there's a lot of additional, sometimes it needs to be signed. All of that stuff that I don't really want to think about as I'm coding my actual logic. So I like pushing it off into a function all by itself.
Yep.
And I think that's a really appropriate use for functions.
Yeah, so it's a very helpful way to do it. And then, if you're going to take that extra step and do unit testing, then you can use something like knock and say, if I call this API call, and then I create like in my test folder, I've got a class called mock helpers. And so if I have like a get items API call that's wrapping the API call, then I have I have a mock get API get items, and all that. And what that does is I can pass in some different parameters. Plus, I pass in an object of what I want it to return. What if it matches the mock, what I want to return, and then I also pass in like a status code, so I can test to see if it's a success status code, or 404 or something, something else. I can test my error conditions, and so it's just nice as you're going through, you just set up your test as if you're going to test the function that you're going to call, that in the end calls the API, but just before that, in the arrange portion of the test, or the setup part, then you go ahead and call this mock helper. And so by the time that Axios gets called, then it's actually really going to just shuffle off over to knock and return back the hard-coded data that I expect to set up the test case that I want to test.
Nope, makes sense. So again, I think we've kind of covered most of it. Again,
yep.
None of it's radical, but I think there are some additional things that we just need to think about and pay attention to when it comes to dealing with voice right now.
Yep.
And I'd love to hear, as always, what other people are doing, and if you've got any tips or tricks that you have for dealing with APIs.
That would be, we would love to hear them. Thank you for your participation, and just thanks for contributing to the voice community. And we will catch you next time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.